Welcome back. We're talking about race and policing in America. Joining us here in Washington is the journalist and commentator Roland Martin. In our newsroom is attorney and senior vice president with the National Urban League, Chanelle Hardy. And also joining us is the public relations executive and wife of a Washington, D.C. police officer, Safiya Jafari Simmons. Thanks to all of you again. Chanelle, whatever criticism there has been made of James Comey's speech, and there has been plenty of it, we just heard the veteran civil rights activist and Congressman John Lewis making the point that it was nothing short of what he called raw courage for James Comey to say what he said. Do you see this as some kind of a turning point?
I hope it is. I think about a movie that I found I think we all found powerful but distressing, A Time to Kill, where the closing arguments involved the defense attorney telling this horrible story of a violent crime against a little girl and then inviting the all-white jury to close their eyes and imagine she was white. I think that this is a little bit of that. As Roland said, we've had individuals of color really sounding this alarm for some time, arguably our entire national history. But when you have someone of the stature and credibility of the FBI director to really shed light on these things, I hope that it can create a turning point. I think it gets back to people's willingness to accept that implicit bias that all of us have. We've made racism this thing where if you have any association that's not colorblind, you're a bad person. And instead, we really need to own what it is that we're bringing with us, especially into these tense interactions between police officers and members of the community in many cases, and be willing to make change. I mean, I think about the comments right before the break around what is the role of responsibility for ourselves and our families. And I know that there's no way that individuals like myself, my only brother is 14 years old, are looking to see how do I equip him to go out into the world. Well, certainly he's a respectful and well-brought-up young man. But I have to say that in the incident of everything since Trayvon Martin really galvanized our national attention, I don't know what to tell him to do to keep himself safe.
Safiya, I'll cut to you in a moment, Roland. Safiya, the point that Chanelle was making there, this is not a new debate. This has been going on for some time. We heard what James Comey had to say, and it may be hard to believe what John Lewis said, that it used to be a lot worse than it is right now. But is it going to make a difference what the director of the FBI said?
You know, I think while we talk about this speech, and it certainly was an important speech. Important because of the message, important because of the messenger, but I think the work started before that. You know, Chanelle talked about Trayvon, we've talked about Michael Brown, but there are organizations, some of the organizations I work with, the Center for Policing Equity, in fact, is one of those organizations where 3 years ago they started collecting data on police use of force, police racial profiling. This data has never been collectively held nationally. So how do we equip our officers to know their biases, to be able to manage their biases if we don't know how those things are manifesting on their day-to-day jobs?
Actions.
And so, exactly, but
himself said,
is a part of that.
Yeah, the director himself said he couldn't find figures for how many black people had been shot in the country.
That's disparaging.
And that's because, again, you had folks who were fighting the collection of that data. Understand how the protests made a difference in that. Last year, Congressman Bobby Scott was the one who sponsored the bill to collect the data of individuals who had been killed at the hands of police or who died even in custody. It was passed in the House, never passed the Senate. It was only when we had the protests in December when senators were told, do you want your names on those placards in these protests all around the country? Then it actually passed right before they broke for Christmas break. That's why there's now a bill that when someone dies in custody, it's now reported to the Department of Justice. But this FBI director understands that. I interviewed Attorney General Eric Holder a couple of weeks ago, and he said, he told me that, he said, Roland, Comey gave him a copy of the actual written order that came from Robert F. Kennedy, who was Attorney General, authorizing the wiretaps of MLK. A copy of that sits right behind the desk of Attorney General Eric Holder as a copy that sits on Comey's desk. And so they understand that law enforcement role. And so I think this goes beyond the speech, it's about actions.
You talk about Attorney General Eric Holder. Here's a question that we get asked very often. This is a show that's going out to a worldwide audience. This is a question that we're asked outside the United States. You have a black president. Until very recently, you had a black attorney general.
Well, he's still there.
Yeah,
so until the religion is confirmed,
right.
And plus she's black, so we'll still have a black attorney general.
Right. He will be leaving soon. But the point that we get asked is, why hasn't the president been more vocal about these killings that have taken place? Why didn't he go to Ferguson?
Very simple. The president of the United States understood how volatile that situation was, Plus, that was a law enforcement issue. And so Eric Holder, that's exactly what his job is. He is the chief law enforcement officer of the United States. No one is higher. And so really, he has been the one driving mandatory minimums, the one driving when it comes to prosecution, the one when it comes to changing DOJ practices. But it's also why Obama picked him. And so he is actually putting into place policy that the president supports. Now, I believe the president should be far more vocal. I believe the president should push when it comes to mandatory minimums. He should be able to address this, but it's exactly the job of Eric Holder, and it's going to be the job of Loretta Lynch when the Senate finally gets off their butt and confirm her to be Attorney General.
Okay, Chanelle, I mean, do you agree with that? Because I was looking at some figures here. The Wall Street Journal reported these figures, that in a 7-year period ending in 2011, only 41 police officers were charged with either murder or manslaughter. And in that same period, the FBI said that there were 2,718 justified homicides by law enforcement. So when I ask whether President Obama should be more involved in this, what I'm saying is, should he change the tone of what is happening? Should he change the attitude down on the street at the rock face? Because there is a feeling that there is a culture of impunity here.
So I think that one of the things that's good and bad about being the president is everybody thinks that you can solve every issue. Certainly, I think it was absolutely necessary that the president deployed Mr. Holder, the Attorney General, to Ferguson in the immediate aftermath of the Michael Brown shooting. You know, he was the emissary of the president, and it sent a very strong message that this was something that was not going to be swept under the rug. But I think that it's going to take the work of the Senate, as Roland referenced. There are some really important bills that have been kind of languishing for a long time. Among them, the End Racial Profiling Act that would really provide some important guidance, safeguards, and enforcement mechanisms around inappropriately using race. And I think that if we could get the Senate to engage and to really legislate to take up Mr. Scott's excellent Deaths in Custody Act as well, then we could make some progress. I also think if we're going to change the culture, let's be honest. I mean, when the president speaks, there's a contingent of folks, predominantly the folks that we're really concerned about here, who react negatively just because he's the one who raised it. And so I think that it's necessary to have other individuals, among them Mr. Kumi, to really say we need to look at ourselves and make some changes. You know, I'll say one of the things I think that's important about Mr. Holder's Smart on Crime initiative is it does reference the fact that communities of color are often over-victimized by crime, and so we actually do need the protection of our law enforcement officers. So it's all the more important for us to make sure that those relationships are strong. And I'll just say, if I was a police officer, I would be absolutely irate that my good name was being dragged through the mud by individuals that are known to be quote-unquote bad apples. I mean, the individuals who are using excessive force and killing people in the line of duty, they have a history of problems. Often we know who they are, and we are not being transparent about that. So I think that there's a role for all of us to play in making our country safer.
Okay. One correction.
Yeah.
I want your worldwide audience to understand. The prosecution of police officers, that's a state prosecution.
Right.
The federal government can't intervene in that. And so you have to change the state laws and the local district attorneys. Right. The president cannot change that.
But he can change the debate.
But he can't. To affect that, that's a change in the state law. And so the call for a special prosecutor, that's a state law. The problem is the local DAs. Okay. That's the issue, not the president.
Safiya, you wanted to respond to what Chanelle was saying?
The bottom line is that their officers are not in the dark. They know that just like the general human population, there are good and bad. The reality is this idea for this national database on statistics came from police chiefs, came from progressive chiefs who said, you know what, I think we have a problem, we need to know this. That is important because just like there are chiefs who want to address this head on, there are officers who take these jobs and they want to have these conversations in these relationships, and they want the scene to go both ways, just like the director said.
I need to throw something out there. We're running out of time. We've got about a minute and a half left. What do you make of that statement, Safiya, made by the former mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, in which he said white policemen are risking their lives by going into black areas to protect blacks from themselves, that we wouldn't have to go there if blacks were not killing themselves?
You know, I think it's unfortunate. I think that statement is unfortunate because one of the things I think we're all trying to say here is that, yes, there's a race issue, but we have to be careful about how we implore that, and we have to be thoughtful about how we use that. In that particular instance, it comes across as if white officers are making some sacrifice that other officers of colors that do not. And it also gives a sense that there is, you know, some higher crime rate among blacks than there are in other groups. The reality is that the highest killer of whites is whites. The highest killer of it's not a black thing.
4 words.
This is an
Right.
understanding of race, period.
4 words. The hell with Rudy.
There you go.
There you
Chanelle,
have it.
I've got just
Cut right to the chase.
There you have it.
Chanelle, I've got a few seconds left, but I want to ask you what happens next. I mean, is this a debate we're going to have because James Comey just made a speech, and then we'll only have this debate again, maybe in a few months' time, when another black man is killed, or what happens next?
Well, I certainly hope that the conversation doesn't end. Groups like mine, the National Urban League, we've been engaged in this conversation throughout our 105-year history, and we don't intend to stop. We're working in coalition with a huge assortment of national and local groups who are really committed to justice for our communities and to making us a country, as one of the organizations to which we belong says, a country as strong as its ideals. So this conversation should not end.
Chanelle, Roland, Safiya, thanks to all of you for joining us. And that's all the time we have for, but the conversation continues online. Join us on CCTV America's Facebook page to comment on this or any other show, or chat with us on Twitter at @CCTV_America. I'm Roland in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.